Welcome inside the RxMuscle studios in Westbury, New York for another episode of Ask Dave, better known as hashtag Ask Dave. Questions and answers with Dave Palumbo. I'm your host, Sadiq Faruqi. Glad you can join us for this second episode of the show. And again, we appreciate all your questions, all the positive feedback across the RxMuscle.com Muscle Central forums, on our Facebook page, on our Twitter page. It's all been very, very well received as we now introduce Dave Palumbo. Dave, we are going to start this show on a bit of a somber note. Of course, this weekend, the bodybuilding and fitness world taken by storm by the passing of Greg Plitt, someone that you interviewed a long time ago and really gotten to know over the years.
Yeah, it was obviously we never want to hear about people dying in our industry, and unfortunately there've been a lot of heart attacks recently on a lot of bodybuilders. Unfortunately for Greg Plitt, he was in perfect health. It was a freak accident. He was, from what the reports are saying now, he was racing a train. I don't know, I know Greg. Greg was an adrenaline junkie. He was an Army Ranger. He went to West Point. He was one of these guys that did everything. He skied, he did extreme sports. And I could just totally see him, drinking a couple, Metrex, energy drinks and saying, I'm going to race this train, and getting on the tracks and doing something and making everyone film it. And, I don't know if he slipped or if he just underestimated the speed of the train. Obviously, your parents always tell you don't play on railroad tracks. And, Greg was never one to really listen. He played by his own rules. And people, you have to respect him for that. He died in an extreme way. He almost reminds me of like a James Dean type of death. He'll probably go down and become more famous because of this. Unfortunately for all his friends and the people that he affected in such a positive manner, we've lost him way too early.
RxMuscle.com and Species Nutrition sends our condolences to Greg Plitt's family, friends, and his legions of fans in this industry. But Dave, we're going to go to a more brighter note now. Again, this is the second episode, and you yourself have gotten a lot of messages, a lot of feedback. What are some of the things that people have been telling you about the first episode of Ask Dave?
Well, people love it because I think people want to know, the answers to their questions, and I think I can write it, but usually when you write it, it's a little more abbreviated. I think when people see me actually speaking about it, it impacts. Because I used to remember when I would listen to people, and even to this day, if I go on YouTube and watch something about snakes or about something in nutrition that I don't know about, I remember it because I remember where I saw it visually. I'm a very visual person, and I think that the Ask Dave on TV, especially live, is way more impactful, and that's where it really amounts to.
All right, so we're going to get started off. We're going to go to the Muscle Central Forum, and if you're not already a member, it is free to register on RxMuscle.com. Loads of knowledge, loads of activity, a lot going on in the Muscle Central Forum. We have 257 people currently viewing right now, and this one is from Marin in Sweden. Dave, he says, in all your videos that I've watched, you claim that insulin is the only hormone that can store fats in fat cells. However, according to Lyle McDonald and Martin Burkham of LeanGains.com, that is not the case. And according to them, A, eating protein produces insulin. B, fat stores itself with tremendous efficiency without insulin due to ASP. What is your take on that?
Well, I mean, the first point is that, amino acids convert to glucose, which causes insulin release. So, once again, your insulin is the first point. Insulin is storing the fat. And the second, factor, fats can be directly stored as fat, but it's a very inefficient process. You have to eat an awful lot of the stuff, and you really have to eat an awful lot of the bad types of fats, specifically saturated fats. So, if you're eating bacon, hamburgers, and cheeseburgers, and all kinds of greasy fried chicken, you're probably going to store some of that as fat. But when we're designing what we call a performance type diet, okay, 99% of this fat that you're going to store is going to come by way of the hormone insulin. And the only reason why insulin would be released in the body is, number one, carbohydrate intake or super, super high protein intake in the absence of carbohydrate intake. Because when the carbohydrate levels are very low in the body in the liver will convert amino acids, which are protein essentially, into glucose. That raises blood glucose, then insulin is released. So you can absorb that. So that is an indirect way, I guess, of getting insulin released in the body. Now, the best way to keep the liver from doing too much of that is obviously to eat the right amount of essential fat, because essential fat will keep that glucose production in the liver down. Also, fiber will reduce the amount of glucose produced in the liver.
Marin goes on to ask about his weight training regimen, Dave. So he's been training since 1991 when he was 18 years old, saying that he's followed the same training program as everybody else, training 4 days a week, 10 to 15 set muscle once a week, 6 to 12 reps. He went through a period of about a decade where he really didn't see any gains. That said, over the last 6 months, he's revved up the intensity, gone to lower reps, but his biggest thing, Dave, is he says, first of all, he's all natural, does not use PEDs. He goes with full body workouts 3 times a week. Is full body workouts the way to go for a natural bodybuilder?
Long term, no. I think what happened is his body got stagnant. And whenever your body gets stagnant in the gym, and a lot of people ask me, what's the best way to train? High intensity training, less reps, higher volume, supersetting, total body workouts. The truth is, yes, to all of those. And I've said this before, switch your training around, because when your body gets used to what you're doing, it doesn't respond anymore. Probably his body got used to the same, training regimen, the same number of sets, the same different exercises and movements. Probably the best gains I ever made was when I worked out with my friend Doug Wentz for about 4 or 5 years. He would, every time we'd come into the gym, we were doing something else. And I hated it because I always thought I had in my mind prepared myself for what I was going to do that day. And then I come in and he's like, all right, we're not doing this. We're not squatting today. We're doing, front squats today. And I was like, oh, I hate those. But you know what? My body responded. So change up the workouts. That's the best way to go. Total body workouts, you do that for more than 4 or 6 weeks, you're gonna lose gains, because what's gonna happen invariably is the muscle's gonna get overtrained because you're training the same muscles 3 times a week. It's just too much.
And finally, Marin wants to know if you are going to be attending FIBO in Cologne, Germany.
I would like to. I don't know if I will be getting there this year. They used to have a pro show there that we would go cover, in addition to obviously the huge expo in FIBO. I have been to the one in Cologne, actually. I think I was there 2 years ago. I spent the week with my good friend Roman Fritz there, who is my tour guide, so to speak. So I'll see if I can get there. If we get a sponsor, possibly. If not, I probably won't.
We now go to our live stream chat box, Dave. This question is from Ryan Reyes. Dave, I've always had a problem with stretch marks, but didn't care when I was younger. But now, being competitive, I need to start doing something about it. What do you suggest?
I always say stretch marks are like battle wounds. They're like, if you know you got them, you're putting on muscle, because the bigger the muscle gets, the more stretch marks you got. I remember when I first started getting mine, I had one right on my shoulder here, which I thought was cool. And then all of a sudden I started getting them on my lats and on my chest. And I was like, it was like they were everywhere. And I could see them everywhere. They would drive me crazy. But then I'm like, you know what? I guess it means I'm growing. And after a while, the stretch marks fade. Nowadays, I don't even see them anymore. They're kind of gone. So they'll go away on their own. I know you can try the vitamin E. Even some people put fish oil on them, macadamia nut, I've heard some people put on there. You're probably not going to get rid of them immediately, but they do fade with time.
We now go back to the Muscle Central forum on RxMuscle.com. We get a question from Fabian. He was watching a YouTube video by Bios3 Training, and he explained there that he used to use 2.5 milligrams tabs of Anavar back in the day, produced by a Mexican pharmacy. You'd only have to take a couple and you'd see great results. These days, Anavar mostly comes in 10 milligram tabs, and they're required to be taken in much larger dosages. He mentions 50 to 100 milligrams commonly. What does this say about the quality of Anavar these days? Is it filled up with other ingredients, and should you be worried?
Well, I think number one, assuming you have real Anavar these days, let's assume you do. Because if you don't, either you have one of two things. Either you have nothing, you're eating a sugar pill, or secondly, you're possibly using like testosterone. So if you're using testosterone because it's not real Anavar, you're probably going to get good results. So let's assume that you have real Anavar. Back in the day, Searle made some Anavar. They were 2.5 milligram pills, and guys would take like 5 or 6 a day of them, which was nothing, compared to what guys. And then the women would take like 2 a day, and they would get results. Now, nowadays, people feel like they got to take, women are taking 20 milligrams a day, and men are taking, 100 milligrams a day. But the truth of the matter is, I think people are just taking more drugs because that's what's in style. Anavar is a very effective drug, but the more you take of it, the more used to it you get. So I think what's happening is people get acclimated real fast to it, and then they don't see the results. The truth is, Anavar is not a very strong drug. It's the weakest drug out there, which is why a lot of women use it, because it is effective with very little side effects. I always recommend that guys kind of don't waste their money on it, because it's kind of like you're not going to really see a lot of results. And if you start taking super high dosage of it, then you're going to start have to worry about liver toxicity, because oral anabolics obviously are degraded by the liver, and they cause excessive stress on the liver.
Here's a good one, and this one will probably apply to many of our viewers. This one comes from the live stream chat box from Leonard Joseph Roche. Dave, what is the best advice you can give me as a type 2 diabetic for eating and exercising?
Well, there's two types of, obviously, diabetes. Type 1 is the autoimmune disease, where your immune system attacks the beta pancreatic cells, destroys them, and the cells can no longer produce insulin. Because they can no longer produce insulin, you have to take an exogenous or you have to take insulin shots every day, essentially. Type 2 diabetics are weird because they fall into two categories. A lot of the people develop type 2 diabetes because they're overweight and their cells become less insulin sensitive, also known as insulin resistant. So in other words, in order for the body to absorb glucose, blood sugar, okay, the body has to produce a ton of extra insulin. And after a while, these beta cells get burnt out and they don't produce enough insulin. And invariably, people have to take either drugs that help resensitize their cells or increase the insulin output, or in some type 2 diabetic case, they may have to take actually a long-acting insulin to help keep their blood sugars, suppressed throughout the day. So what kind of a diet do you follow? Well, obviously, if insulin is the problem, and the only thing that stimulates insulin release is sugar ingestion or carbohydrate ingestion. By keeping carbohydrate ingestion lower, you're going to lower your requirements for insulin, and you're going to keep your blood sugars lower on a daily basis, which is a much healthier way of eating. So for type 2, even type 1 diabetics, I recommend high protein, obviously, moderate carb diet, especially high in essential fats like omega-3s, because those help sensitize you to insulin as well. And keep the carbohydrates moderate to low. If you keep your carbs moderate to low, your blood sugar control will be 1,000 times better. Most type 2 diabetics, can overcome the disease to the point where they don't even need to take any medications anymore, all through diet, and that's through low-carb dieting.
You're watching Ask Dave, presented by Species Nutrition on RxMuscle.com. Question and answers with Dave Palumbo. If you want to get your questions in, you can tweet using hashtag AskDave. You can comment on the Muscle Central forum on RxMuscle.com. It is free to register. Or if you follow us on Facebook on Dave Palumbo's RxMuscle.com fan page, we have a thread going there, and we are starting to get some questions. But Dave, we're going to go back to Twitter. This question from @Muhammad_Zaidan. Is there any way to train legs if I have an L5 disc injury?
L5 being the lumbar region of the spine, whenever you have disc injuries, there's the risk of this disc impinging or pushing on the spinal cord. And when that happens, you get pain, you can get numbness in the limb, or the limb may not just work. You might have nothing, no feeling there. Obviously, most bodybuilders, if they went to a doctor and got a spinal x-ray, they would be told that they have either bulging discs or they have impingements there. It just comes with the territory, so to speak. I'm sure I got some, even though I have never had them officially diagnosed. What do? Well, what I tell people to do, my clients, is do what you can do. In other words, train as long as it's not painful. A lot of times building up and starting slow again, doing your strengthening core exercises, doing your hyperextensions, doing the mass building movements, but at much lighter weight will build the strength up. Because remember, if you support the spinal column with muscle, the spinal column will be better aligned and you'll have less chance of impingement or any kind of bulging. And it actually sometimes might even push the bulge back into place. So, like I said, do what is not painful. If you're getting serious pain, that's your body telling you that you shouldn't be doing that. A lot of guys I know have had good results with epidural injections, which are they inject like some cortisone and some anesthetic into the spinal column around that joint, hopefully reducing the inflammation around that disc and giving you some freedom of pain,
Dave, we go back to the Muscle Central forum on RxMuscle.com, and earlier we had a question about or dealing with livers. We have another question about livers. Now, Bill 2 asks, or says rather, that he was fat growing up. He had developed a non-alcoholic fatty liver. Nowadays, after years of exercise and healthy eating, the fat in the liver is gone and his blood work is completely fine. However, he would like to experiment with anabolic steroids to further up the fat-free mass. And his question is, what compounds can he safely use and really without any sort of risk to the fatty liver again?
Well, fatty liver, at least non-alcoholic, means it wasn't caused by drinking excessive amounts of alcohol. Non-alcoholic fatty liver is usually due to people who are overweight, they have high triglyceride levels. What happens is the liver is an organ, it stores the fat in there. And that's obviously not good because it gets in the way of the liver cells doing their job, okay? So detoxifying the blood, obviously releasing bile and all that stuff. Since he's gotten rid of that, obviously his liver, and the liver is a great organ because it's very regenerative. So it is forgiving. So if you do a little bit of damage to it and then you give it some time to rest, it will regenerate. And that's obviously a positive sign. It seems like his liver is doing well now. Now, the question of anabolics. Some guys, like to take oral anabolics, pills, because they're easy. You don't have to inject them. The problem with the pills is that they have to go through the liver twice. That means one time when you swallow them and they go through your digestive tract, then a second time through the liver when the compound actually gets broken down. That puts extra stress on the liver. We call it second pass or two pass. Injectable anabolics, especially the long-acting ones, only go through the liver once, and they go through in very small durations because they break down very slowly. So the liver is only detoxifying these compounds over a very long period of time. Those are the safest anabolics for the liver because you're not putting undue stress on it. So if you're looking to preserve your liver and you might have had something wrong with it earlier in life, stick with the long-acting injectables like the testosterones, equipoises, decas. Those compounds are going to be relatively innocuous in terms of liver toxicity.
Dave, we go back to Twitter now. This question from @JoeCristiano. Dave, I heard you say whey isolate and a little fat is a better nighttime choice than casein protein. He's wondering why, and then he, of course, included #AskDave and #WhyCutBack.
Well, first of all, when we talk about time-release proteins, this is it was really a marketing, I guess you could say, slogan they came up with. The best, highest quality proteins on the market are really the whey isolates. And we've talked about this, but I've talked about this ad infinitum. Whey isolate is the purest form of protein you can get on the market. It gets absorbed very rapidly. It has no lactose in it. It has a great amino acid profile, very high in branched chains, residues. I mean, it's just the ideal protein. But a lot of people at night don't like to take it because you take a couple scoops of it, and then in a half hour or an hour, you're starving again, and the stuff has already been processed through your bloodstream. So the question is how to make it last longer. Well, a few companies said, you know what, I got a great way to make it last longer. Let's add some casein protein to it, which basically is in a lot of companies, not all companies, in a lot of companies' situation, they're putting that in there because it's a cheaper protein. And they're putting it in there at up to 50% or maybe more than that. Okay, if you put casein in your protein, you really only want to put 10-15% in there. That'll slow it down enough. Personally, I like to use fats as a I guess you could say a method of slowing down the absorption of protein. Why? Because when fats hit the intestinal tract, the liver releases bile, and bile tells the intestinal tract, stop, slow down. We gotta digest this fat, and that gives the protein a much longer life in the intestinal tract. So it gives you a much better chance of absorbing it at a slower rate. And when you absorb whey protein at a slower rate, you assimilate it much better. So I always tell people, make your own time-release protein. Use the highest quality whey isolate with a tablespoon of macadamia nut oil, a tablespoon of all-natural peanut butter, or a tablespoon of all-natural almond butter, blend it in there, and do that before bed. Having said that, if you do have a company whose protein you like and they have a small amount of casein in there, and you can verify that it's a small amount, then that's fine too. Like we have Protolyze, it's our species nutrition product that's our protein pudding. It's a 90% isolate, 10% casein protein that when you mix it up, it tastes like pudding. It's a thick, nice, good dessert. to do before bed, and that'll last a little longer in the body. Make it even better, I know people that actually mix some peanut butter in there with it as well. Fats always will delay absorption of proteins better than proteins themselves.
Dave, we go back now to the Muscle Central forum on RxMuscle.com. And of course, we mentioned the passing of Greg Plitt, that being a freak accident, but you did mention this recent rash of deaths in the bodybuilding world. And Taco Hut goes on to say that the deaths in the bodybuilding world has substantially increased over the past few years in comparisons to generations past. Obviously, there are genetic and hereditary factors at play. However, there must be some differentials in amount or use of drugs compared to the 90s and certainly the 60s and 70s. What are your thoughts on that in terms of the recent rash of deaths in this industry?
Two things on that. Number one, we do see some deaths due to like kidney failure, liver failure, but very few and far between. Those are more on the rare side, which that would imply toxicity of compounds. Most of the deaths we see, are from heart attacks or heart-related stuff. And so what's causing that? Well, there's two things that are causing the heart problems. Number one, weightlifting in general and being, 250 and up to 300 pounds is a strain for the heart. And what happens is the heart is a muscle and it gets larger and thicker. And when that left ventricle, which is the chamber of the heart that pumps the blood to the entire body, gets super thick, a lot of times it doesn't transmit the signal properly. And you may get like irregular beats, you might get arrhythmias you can get, which can definitely lead to sudden heart attacks, obviously. Also, the thicker the chamber, the less blood it's pumping, and it becomes less efficient. Now, if you also have a family predisposition to have a cardiomyopathy or some kind of heart issue, on top of if you add a super thickened heart to that, it's like the perfect storm of and it just makes things even worse. So what my recommendation is that people go and get checked out. Anyone over the age of 25, 30 should start getting regular echocardiograms. They should get EKGs. Just go to your cardiologist. Even your regular doctor can do this. Check out the thickness of your heart. Make sure your rhythm is good. These are simple tests. They don't cost a lot of money. They don't take a lot of time. You don't have to go to a special place to do it. So it's not inconvenient. And you know what? It can really save your life, because the truth is you don't know if you have something wrong with your heart until you have something happen to you. And that's the worst time to find out. So I recommend highly that people get checked out. As a matter of fact, I know what the second part of the question is. Maybe I'll let you ask that.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's really compelling question to ask in regard to the way that the industry should be viewing this issue, and that is whether or not the golden era of sorts, which has a lot of competitors which are still alive and healthy today, should that ideal be promoted? What should the industry stance be on this issue?
Well, unfortunately, the bigger the person, the more likely you'll have a thickened heart. And the longer you've been big, the bigger the likelihood that you have an enlarged heart. Now, for some people, that's not a problem. For other people, it's a huge problem, because if you have anything wrong with your heart, in addition to it being bigger, that's when the problems occur. Should there be a health physical that people have to pass in order to compete? Maybe there should. I don't know. Maybe it's a good suggestion. Maybe that all bodybuilders should be able to have to take a certain medical clearance test, have their blood pressure checked, have their echocardiogram, EKG taken, make sure they're not at risk for sudden death. Hey, fighters do it, right? Boxers and MMA fighters have to get checked by a physician prior to them getting in the ring. Maybe bodybuilders should have to as well.
We go back to the live stream chat room, and this question is from Tom Ramsey. Do you find SSRI antidepressants to cause weight gain? If so, do you know by what mechanism?
I've seen people, Wellbutrin, I've seen a few other antidepressants. People definitely gain weight on these things. How they do it, who the heck knows? Whenever you start messing with the neurotransmitter, I guess you could say ratios in your brain and in the rest of your body, you're screwing with fat loss, okay? Because remember, fat loss responds, to beta cell stimulation. So when, if anyone has ever taken clenbuterol, which is a beta-2 agonist, an asthma medication, they know that it helps burn fat. When you stimulate beta receptors, fat burning increases. Ephedra does the same thing. It stimulates beta receptors. When you start blocking other receptors, when you block beta receptors, you can gain weight more. So a lot of guys who take beta blockers have trouble getting erections. They gain weight. Well, same thing with these SSR, I guess you could say antidepressants that people take. When you start blocking, transmission of certain neurotransmitters or extending the life of others, we find that weight gain ensues. What the mechanism is, no one really knows for sure, to be honest with you. And that's where you kind of you can't really say it's a definitive thing, because not everyone gains weight. I think personally it changes your taste buds and can increase the desire for starchier foods, fattier foods, and it changes people's diet. Because I noticed the guys that are really strict with their diet really don't have weight gain problems. It's the people that tend to be a little looser with the way they eat that get, put on the weight. And a lot of guys will even admit, I've been eating a lot more junk than normal, and I don't know why.
We go back now to our Facebook page, Dave. This question from Star Blaylock, and he wants to know, she wants to know, how's married life for Dave Palumbo these days?
Great. I gotta say, I really enjoy it. I would not have gotten married had I not found the right person. And obviously, my wife Amanda and I, have found something in common that works for us. We have the same interests. We like to spend time together, which is the most important thing. If you don't like to spend time with your spouse, it's not going to work. And we just get along. So I can't complain. I enjoy it. We're around each other almost all the time. We don't get sick of each other, and life is good.
We go back to the Muscle Central forum on RxMuscle.com, and if you're not already a member, it is free to register. This question from Baby Muscle. Why is it that some people, especially females, will run an injectable like Equipoise and not experience the more uncomfortable side effects until after they end the cycle or towards the very end? She goes on to say that she knows several people who ran an 8 to 10 week cycle of a single compound in a modest dose. They would have dropped the compound sooner had they seen any negative effects sooner, but didn't know until the last week that they would have them. Is this related to the length of the cycle, or their genetics, or what?
Well, it goes back to what my statement I always make to people, or at least to women. It's not whether you're going to get side effects, it's when you'll get the side effects. And, in women, any kind of anabolic steroid side effect, whether it be acne, water retention, hair facial growth, deepening of the voice, any of these side effects are all just related to, number one, compounds used. The more androgenic compounds will produce those quicker, and length of time you use them. So the longer you use these things, and everyone who always says, I'm just going to do one cycle, if you're going to compete, you're going to do more than one cycle. So you have to be smart. And I always recommend that women, number one, shouldn't use any anabolics, but if they are going to use anabolics, probably Anavar is the safest because it's got the least side effects. The problem is that women will want results quicker. So what they'll do is they'll use a stronger compound like Decadurabolin or Equipoise, as like this person is suggesting, and they'll use it for 6 weeks and they'll get tremendous muscle gains and they'll get virtually no side effects. And that's because these compounds are super long acting. So they don't really start kicking in till the 3rd or 4th week that a person's taking it. So by the time they're going off it, the stuff's still in their system another 4 weeks, and that's when they see the side effects. And then the side effects come on in brutal fashion, and there's no way to negate it because the stuff is in their system for another 4 weeks, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And then after a while, people start saying, oh, well, I have these side effects, I might as well keep going, and then they wind up doing another cycle, and it just gets progressively worse. So the trick is don't get the side effects to begin with, which means don't use, as a woman, highly androgenic compounds, and don't use long-acting compounds. The trick is short-acting, mild compounds. The less time the stuff is in your body, less chance of side effects.
You're watching Ask Dave on RxMuscle.com, brought to you by Species Nutrition. You can go now to speciesnutrition.com, and we're going to go back over now to our Twitter feed. And again, if you have any questions via Twitter, use the hashtag AskDave. This one coming from @TRTCarney, and it is another question for females. Dave, what's your take and dosage for Primobolan on a female that's already on 10 milligrams of Anavar?
Primobolan is one of those compounds that women do use with success with less side effects because it is milder, but it happens to be a longer acting compound, especially the injectable, version of it. Now, they used to have Primobolan acetate tabs back in the day, which were very fast acting. They only lasted in the body for a couple hours, and those were great because they didn't really give much side effects. But the Primobolan and Nanthate injections, which are available, and another thing I've noticed, at least in clients of mine, stuff like that, a lot of the Primobolan out there is not real, and people are putting testosterone in there. So you got to be really careful of using that. If I was a woman, I would be wary. I might not even risk it, to tell you the truth. But if you're going to use it, 50 milligrams once a week is usually more than enough. Super advanced users might use 50 milligrams twice a week. I would recommend 50 a week the most.
We have time just for a few more questions, and we're getting a lot of really, really good ones. This one, Dave, comes from a loyal RxMuscle.com follower, AceDeals93. First of all, he wants to congratulate you on a great show and really enjoying it. And again, we really appreciate the positive feedback that we've gotten from episode 1. And right now, our producer, Johnny Styles, is ringing in all these questions. So we're very, very appreciative of the response and the feedback. Modern science shows that leptin and insulin bind to the same receptor, verifying the efficacy of low-carb diets. With this in mind, does the pre-contest bodybuilder want to avoid insulin altogether?
Well, it goes back to the old, what I said, I think, at question 1. Insulin is a hormone that stores calories, stores carbohydrates specifically as fat. So if you're trying to burn fat, in your body or maximize fat burning, you want to create a hormonal environment that's conducive to fat burning, which means low insulin, high growth hormone. What causes low insulin? Well, low carb diets. What raises growth hormone levels? High protein, low carb, moderate fat diets. So those are the optimal, I guess you could say, circumstances. Now, leptin is a hormone that tells your body, basically tells your brain, you're not hungry anymore. Interestingly, when your body releases insulin, or when you eat carbs, your body also releases leptin. That's why they kind of have a synergism to each other. So carbohydrates a lot of times will quench appetite because, with the insulin release, you get the leptin release, which tells your body, I'm not hungry anymore. The good thing about eating a very low-carb diet, especially where your brain is not using glucose anymore and it's in a state of what we call ketosis, is that your brain is not dependent on glucose anymore as a fuel source. Your brain is using fat as a fuel source, and we could talk about that for another hour. So the best way to keep appetite down would be, number 1, to eat a low-carb, to eat a low-carb diet. Number 2, the best environment to burn fat in is a low-carb diet because insulin levels will be lower.
All right, Dave, we're going to go rapid fire on these next ones because they are good questions. They're coming from loyal RxMuscle.com followers, so we don't want to ignore their question. This one from Carrie Ann Simmons. What are your thoughts on Cissus?
Cissus was a nutritional supplement, I think it came out about 10 years ago, and it was used for joint pain, because what it was almost like a natural version of like ibuprofen. It was a natural anti-inflammatory. Here's the reason I'm not a big fan of it, and I never put it in any of my joint formulas. A certain degree of inflammation in the body, specifically after your training. So if you break down muscle tissue and there's an inflammatory response that ensues, that's the signal for the body to rebuild the muscle bigger. If you take too much anti-inflammatory post-exercise, you reduce that inflammatory signal and you might actually inhibit muscle growth. I found personally that when I used to take ibuprofen after I trained, I felt like I didn't grow as well. And that was just anecdotally. Then obviously more and more research came out over the years, and now we know that a certain degree of inflammation is necessary for muscle growth. Now, when you talk about old people, like in their 70s, 80s, 90s, they have so much inflammation in their body that could actually inhibit muscle growth. So in old people, research has shown that they actually do better and recover better from workouts when they're on anti-inflammatory. So Cissus may be a better product for, say, someone in their 70s and 80s to use as opposed to a younger person.
David, go back to Twitter now. This question coming from @HollyLala01, Holly Bartlett. She wants to know if you plan on going to the Arnold Australia.
I've been mulling that around. It's a very long flight. Chris Aceto and I were on the same flight last year, although we didn't talk to each other for 3 seconds because we both slept the whole time. And it took 24 hours to get there and then 24 hours to get back. That's actual fly time, and it's such a long, tiring trip. And I know I'm going to be at the Arnold the week before that. I love to see my good friend Tony Doherty. I'm thinking about it, but unless we have a sponsor for that event, like I said about Germany, I think I'm going to be laying low this year. I'm trying to cut back the travel. I'm trying to put more time into developing the Species Nutrition product line, and I'm working on a book. I've been putting it off for so many years. I really think that it's about time. I feel like the time is right for me to write the nutrition book that has been percolating in my head for the last 20 years.
Well, Dave, we go back to the Muscle Central Forum, and speaking of species, this question from Baby Muscle: will you consider, or it says please consider, coming out with an apple cinnamon flavor or cinnamon maple flavored Fiberlize?
Not out of the question. I don't know how it would taste. I guess I'd have to have my flavoring guy, mull it around a little bit. Sid, maybe we'll throw it over to them and see what they can come back with. I'm very wary. I tried a vanilla fiber product. A vanilla flavor of Fiberlize, and I tasted it, and you know what? It was like too chalky almost. It just, for some reason, fiber is much more enjoyable with some kind of a fruity, tangy taste to it. So I don't know if the apple cinnamon would work or not, but I'd certainly be willing to give it a shot.
Dave, we now go to our Facebook page, and again, if you want to follow along or follow the Facebook page in general, it is Dave Palumbo's RxMuscle.com fan page. Is Facebook.com/RxMuscle.com. And I guess this is something of an inside joke from the Heavy Muscle Radio side from Raymond Rieger. Says, first off, I just want to say I hate your show, and I don't know why you started a new segment. Second, my question is, where do you truly see bodybuilding 10 years from now with all these contracts being dropped and endorsements being lost? Will the quality of pros continue to go on a decline?
It's a good question. First of all, the inside joke at Heavy Muscle Radio is that we always tell people who listen to the show, if you like the show, just tell us you hate it. Because I don't want to hear, I hate when people say, oh, I love the show. Tell me how much you hate it. So people always come up with creative ways to tell me that. But getting back to the question of where bodybuilding will be in 10 years, it's I don't think that we'll see a decline necessarily in the quality. I think we're going to see a decline in the quantity. I think more men are going to go into men's physique. I think eventually they will come out with a classic men's bodybuilding division, which will be kind of a men's physique light, or a bodybuilding light, I should say, posing but on a smaller frame. And I think that the mass monsters in the bodybuilding world will always be there, but I think there's going to be a greatly reduced number of them because people are not going to want to subject themselves to what it takes to get to that point. They're not going to want to. A lot of people are just lazy in our society. They're instant gratification. They don't want to put the 10 years of hard work it takes to be a successful pro bodybuilder. And like you said, there's less and less money available to these bodybuilders nowadays. And but a lot of people say the magazines are dying, the athletes are losing contracts. But you know what? There's a lot more opportunity nowadays for these athletes to do it on their own, via social media, via YouTube. And I think that's where the money's going to come from. Athletes are going to have to take their own life into their own hands, and they're going to have to make their money off their brand, which is themselves. And I think that we're so enabling our society, and we were so used to people just giving us a handout, that this is a new concept. But I think that there is a generation of bodybuilders that are adapting. I see a lot of social media giants out there, and I think those are going to be your new biggest, salaried employees, essentially, the ones that make it for themselves.
We'll go back now to the live stream chat room. Our producer, Johnny Styles, saying that there's so much conversation in the chat box. And again, we really, really do appreciate that. This one comes from Adrian. Advice, Dave, on muscle recovery time for natural bodybuilders. Anything specific that you would recommend?
I'm a big believer in taking more rest than not. I know guys that train each body part twice a week. I know a guy who trains his body part 3 times a week. I just think that's way too much. I just don't think your body can recover unless you're super genetically gifted. And there's not that many people out there. So don't listen to what, Ronnie Coleman does, where he used to train each body part twice a week, because you will never recover the way Ronnie Coleman does. He's a 1 in a gazillion. And I'm telling you that I know him personally. Okay, I always needed at least 7 to 8 days on each body part. I used to do not a 7-day rotation, I would do an 8-day rotation, giving each body part a complete 7 days of rest before I trained it again. And I felt that that was optimal for me to make the best gains possible. And it also, when I would get into the gym, I was so itching to train that body part because it had been a whole 7 days that I would give 100%. The body part was well rested, my brain was fresh, and I found that that's how I got my best gains. I would take 2 days off every 8 days, and then 6 days a week I would be training, and I split up. I even split arms up. I would train triceps on its own day and biceps and forearms on its own day. That was the best cycle of training regimen that I personally experienced. I do know that some people probably can recover a little faster, but I wouldn't recommend training each body part more than once every 5 or 6 days.
Dave, we're going to stick with the live stream chat box. This one from MZYZZ. Can you explain what carb cycling is? How do you stay insulin sensitive?
Well, carb cycling is basically each day what you're doing is you're changing your carb content. So while protein and fat might be a certain amount, and you eat, like, say, 100 grams of carbs one day, the next day you may raise carbs up to 300 grams, and you may cut your fat back a little bit or your protein back a little bit. And then the following day you might do a 500 carb day. And then on the fourth day you might go down to 50 grams of carbs a day, and depending on, what your goals are. If you're trying to go for weight loss, the carb cycling amounts don't vary as much. They're usually a little on the lower side. Off-season wise, if you're carb cycling, because you tend to get fat easily, you might have a couple really super high days on, like, your leg training and back days, and then you might have real low days on maybe arm day, or days that don't require as much, or your off days, days that might not require as much energy. I personally am not a carb cycler. I like to consistently give the same diet to my clients, because then I know what's working and what's not. The only time I will carb cycle a little bit is during contest time, because then I can I use the carbs almost as a shock, a shock effect to the body. Because obviously when you give carbs, your metabolism picks up. When you take them away, the body will burn more fat on those off days. So it depends what your goals are, but they can vary, and it really depends on person. I know guys that I've given 800-900 grams of carbs a day, and I know guys that I've only given 50 to 75 grams of carbs a day. It's really metabolism dependent.
We go back to our Twitter feed now. This one coming from Hassan Safa Kiraglu at HSN Kiraglu. Dave, can you use Arimidex to lower estrogen even if you do not take any sort of anabolic steroids?
Absolutely you can, but you got to watch it, because Arimidex is a strong aromatase inhibitor. What that means is that it prevents the conversion of testosterone into estrogen. Now, in every male body, we all produce testosterone to some degree, okay? Whether you're injecting it or your body's naturally producing it, whatever testosterone's in the body, a certain percentage will convert to estrogen, a certain percentage will convert to DHT, or dihydrotestosterone. By taking Arimidex, whether you're a natural or not natural bodybuilder, you will block that testosterone into estrogen conversion. If you're a natural bodybuilder and you're not producing that much testosterone, and then you take a strong aromatase inhibitor like Arimidex every day, you might block all your estrogen production, and that's not good, because estrogen is necessary to sensitize the androgen receptors for growth purposes, and it's necessary for your sex drive. So you don't want to get rid of all the estrogen. The best way to determine if you're doing it right is go for blood work. Let them test your free testosterone. Let them test your total testosterone, and let them test your estrogen and DHT, so you can see where your level's at, and then you can decide how much or how little to take.
Dave, we go back to the Muscle Central forum on RxMuscle.com. This one comes from The Flash. I don't know whether this has been asked or answered before, but where or how did you come up with the RX for RxMuscle?
It wasn't actually me that figured it out, or came up with it, I guess you could say. The RX stands for prescription, and the original slogan was RxMuscle, your prescription for hardcore muscle. And, it was like a takeoff on that. And that was our original slogan when I first started the magazine as a magazine. And it was actually another guy who had hired me to run this magazine. He then kind of got cold feet and didn't want to do it. And he said, I feel bad. I got you involved in this. I'm just going to give you the name and the website address. And that's really how RxMuscle started. I took it over. I ran it as a magazine for a number of years. Then I started working full-time for Muscle Development, as we all know. And I kind of just let the RxMuscle kind of like hang in limbo. And then when I left MD in 2006 or 2009, excuse me, I started it up again as a website. So
we're going to take one last question from Twitter. This one coming from @ChrisFackrell. Always found sleeping at a regular time impossible. Tried GABA, but it only relaxes me. What would you advise? If often it takes so long for me to fall asleep that I need to eat again because I'm starving, which ruins my macros, and he wants to remind you that he hates the show.
I love that you hate the show. No, the best thing to do is if you get hungry at night is try to time your last meal right before you go to sleep. That's what I do. I eat and then I go to sleep because I don't want to wake up hungry. Because if you wake up hungry, you never fall back asleep. That's the bottom line. The second thing to do is another good thing that I do at night is I take a Fiberlize shake right before bed. I take a scoop, I mix it in water, and that really bulks up my stomach also, and that will also prevent me from being hungry at night. Because hunger is the worst thing to keep you awake. Most people's sleeping problems are the fact that they're hungry at night. Now, if you have trouble actually falling asleep and keeping in a deep sleep, GABA is a great supplement to relax you. You're right. I have a product called Somalize, which is my nighttime fat burner and sleep aid. The advantage of putting the GABA in there for relaxation is you have to combine it with melatonin, which keeps you in a deep sleep. So it'll prevent you from waking up. Because what happens is, even the old GHB a lot of people use to fall asleep, which is kind of a derivative of the GABA, always knocked you out real good, but then you'd wake up and you'd be wide awake. So the combination of GABA and melatonin together in the right ratio will relax you to fall asleep, and it will keep you in a nice deep sleep and give you a good night's sleep. So try 3 pills of Somalize right before bed, or if you want to do it yourself generically, take 2,000 units of GABA before bed with 3 milligrams of melatonin. And I guarantee you'll see some great results because, like I said, most people's problem is falling asleep and then staying asleep. This takes care of both issues.
We have time for one more question, and this is a question that we got actually on our Facebook page, and we wanted to save it till the very end. This one comes from Wayne Crandell. Dave, if you went back, and actually, you know what? I'm wrong. This one is from Stosh on the Muscle Central Forum, so I wanted to give him credit for this.
Wayne is a client of mine, so I thought it was going to be
Well, you know what? How about let's take Wayne's question first then, so we don't leave him in the cold. What's the best for after a cycle, post-cycle therapy, that you could say that you could stay on testosterone at 200 milligrams a week till the next cycle?
I'm not a big believer in bridging cycles with testosterone. Having said that, because I like to go off everything. I recommend my clients go off everything because when they go off everything, your receptors become refreshed way quicker. If you stay on a little bit of testosterone, 200 milligrams, you're not going to get that same drastic effect when you go back on cycle. Now, having said that, some people are on hormone replacement because they're over the age of 40, 45, 50, whatever. For those people, I usually recommend go back to your hormone replacement dosages. If it was 100 a week, go to 100 a week. If you were taking 200 milligrams of testosterone a week, go back to that because that's what you're normally on anyway. And then when you go back to your cycles, you can go back to whatever you were taking. But for normal people who are not on hormone replacement 365 days a year, go off completely. That means everything.
So now the final question, this again coming from the Muscle Central Forum on RxMuscle.com. If you're not already a member, go there now, sign up for free. It is going to be a very entertaining decision that you make. This one comes from Stosh. Dave, if you could go back in time and talk to your 20-year-old self, what advice would you give him?
I'm the kind of guy that says I have no regrets in life. So I don't know if I would change very much of what I did. Advice-wise, I'd probably tell myself to take more Arthrolyze, take a lot more glucosamine and MSM because I have really bad shoulders. That's the only thing I'm kind of really not happy about, that I really didn't know that back in the day, that if I had only, with all that protein I was eating and all that hardcore training I was doing, if I just took enough 4,000 milligrams of glucosamine and 4,000 milligrams of MSM per day, that I would have been fine. I think that would have helped me out tremendously. But you know what? The truth is that, the wisdom you have later in life would never be relevant at 20 years old. I never would have listened to myself because I had different goals and I had different mindset at 20 years old than I do now. So the wisdom I have now is applicable to what I'm doing now, whereas the mindset, the aggressive, I want to be the biggest bodybuilder. I want to, eat big. And that's my only interest at the expense of everything else is what I needed when I was 20 years old. So, really, I think the reason why we age the way we do, there is a greater, higher intelligence at work here. And I think that it sets you up in the right capacity. Now, luckily, I did go to jail, obviously, for 5 months. People know that. And people would say, well, wouldn't you tell yourself to avoid that? And you know what? I think I needed that. I think that was necessary as a learning process for myself. And it changed who I was as well for the better. So I would not tell myself. So I wouldn't tell myself anything aside from the joints because my shoulders kind of suck right now.
Well, that's going to do it for another episode of Ask Dave. Again, we appreciate all your questions on our Twitter feed, in our live stream chat box on our Facebook page, and of course on the Muscle Central forum on RxMuscle.com. Special thanks to our producer Johnny Styles. And again, log on to speciesnutrition.com. We have a lot of things in store for you, a lot of surprises coming up in the next few days. Programming reminder, tomorrow on the first edition of Live on RX Muscle, we're going to be joined by IFBB Bikini Pro Margaret Nahr, straight from Iceland. You're not going to want to miss that. Last night, The Fitness View featuring IFBB Pro Sarah LeBlanc is live now on RxMuscle.com. Till next week, have a good one.